Hi everybody, thanks for joining me tonight or today, whenever it is that you are joining me. I am going to do a serving tray. I do love functional art, so that would be something that I do that's artistic that you can actually use in your home as opposed to just a painting hanging up on the wall. And those are great too, but not all of us have a lot of space. And I went through a phase where I really got into doing these trays, and I want to do another one. Hi creators, I bought this box of Arteza Paints. Each paint is 22 milliliters, so not a lot. Here's some different colors that I have in the pinks that I picked out because I'm thinking I want to have my flowers in pink. And I love these colors because they're pearlized. So they have a nice little sheen to them. And when the light hits them a certain way, they look really pretty. And there's some blues, a little bit of blue-green. Here are some paintbrushes that I bought at Ross. Always check Ross or Marshall's in the art department if you have one near you, because I've got that big box, or what do you want to call it? I got those for $9.99, and they work pretty well. Those are the brushes I'm going to use to paint my flowers, so I'm pointing that out. And then here are the flowers and leaves that I bought. I got 300 of them for less than $10. It is quite a tedious job to paint them, but they come in wood, and there's a pretty leaf. And then here's one of the flowers that they have. That reminds me of Hawaii, like a plumeria flower. And then here's one with some rounded edges, like a daisy. And let's see this next one. The edges are more squared off, but very similar to the one before. And then this one is like a sunflower, and I really like it a lot. This is the plumeria one again. The daisy one, I'm probably going to use these. I'm having to make a choice. And here's where I bought them, who I bought them from, on Amazon. And there's another little leaf, and that's a really cute flower. I love that. Okay, so here's the flowers I've picked out, and I've decided that I'm going to group them in threes. And this is the site I bought the trays from, real affordable. So I'm going to group these in three. I just laid them out to get an idea of how I want to do the painting. So I'm going to start with my first set of flowers, and I'm going to use one of the paints from the Arteza kit of 36. Keep an eye out for that kit. It's really good, or that box set. It does go on sale sometimes. I buy all my stuff on sale, you guys. So I got one of those little brushes out of that paint set that I showed you, and just put a little dollop, of the paint on a little tray that I got from the dollar store, actually. And I'm going to paint the whole entire flower as a base. So I'll go through and paint all of those, and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, now here's the sunflower, and I am painting the outside first because the inside part is fairly big, and I want to do the flowers in white, so I don't want to paint the inside a bright color and then have the white interfere with that when I paint the white. So I'm going to do the white part first. And with these flowers, sometimes you especially when you're using a lighter color, you're going to need to go around the leaves twice. And then this is another Arteza color that I've picked out from the box of paints, the pearl paints. And I've decided to put that on the inside. The flowers that you see to the right of it are the ones that I did at first, and I'm not real happy with how they turned out. I mean, they look okay right now, but I'm just not real happy with them, so I decided that I'm going to redo those. And I actually end up turning them over to the other side instead of trying to fix that. But here I am with the daisies or I'm calling them daisies, sunflowers, and I'm giving it 2 coats. And I'm really liking how that flower turned out. I think they're real cute. Now I've moved on to the next flower that I'm doing, and this is a neon pink by Artist Loft. Painted the inside part with the white in the middle first, and then I've decided to paint the hot pink part on the outside of that flower. So those will be my 3 different flowers that are going to go inside the tray. I poured a lot of white paint there, a little more than I needed. And that white paint is Artist Loft, and you can get it at Michael's. And there's an up close of the flower. It does have a little bit of design in it with the wood. There's some lines in that flower, so I left those showing. Not all the flowers are like that though, but this one does that, so I just left it as is. And I'm going to finish up painting it, and then we'll move to the next step. Here are the flowers that I originally painted, the very first ones that I painted. And now I turned them over. First I decided, oh, I'll just cover it up and redo it. And then I thought, that's just too much work. So I just turned them over, and I base coated them with a very light pink. The color is called Pale Pink, and it's by Grumbacher. I don't think I'm saying that right. I always say Academy. They're nice paints, and I'll get them when I see them on sale. I always like to have a light pink around. You just never know when you need it. So I'm going to do the inside of this flower, and it's a little bit tricky now because I don't have any lines. And I'm going to start with putting a little center, making a center for each flower. This is going to help me with the next step. I don't have any lines, and the pink is going to be the color that I'll use to embellish the flower, and the light pink is just the background. So I'm making some lines in between the petals to kind of give me a little more balance and a little more direction, and then I pull out from the middle with the paint to give the petal a little embellishment. I also take that darker pink and go around the edge, the outer edge of each flower. And a little bit time consuming because I'm going to need to do it to all of them. And it takes a quick minute there to get it done. There I'm going around the outside edge, just to give it a little more definition. I like doing that on these wood flowers sometimes. And then I'll hold the piece down with something other than my finger so I don't leave a big, imprint of my finger onto the flower. And that's the tray. It's very lightweight, but it's all wood. But it has a nice little raised area before the handle, which is enough to lay down those flowers. They're very thin, and to put the epoxy over it. Now I took sky blue and sea green from my Arteza set, and I mixed them together in a cup, and I painted the inside. Those are the two colors there that I used. And I just squeezed it out of the tube in different areas. Actually, I'm sorry, I did not mix it up. I apologize. I squeezed it out of the tube in different areas. But when I do the rest of the painting on the tray, I mix the colors together, and that's because I've created that base color and I'm going to need to match it in the future. Here are some greens that I have, and I'm going to go ahead and paint some leaves. I separated out leaves when I separated out the flowers. And originally I was just going to do flowers, and then I thought, you know what? I'm going to paint some leaves and put some leaves on to the flowers because they're going to be in bunches, and I just think it will add to it and make it look really cute. I decided to keep the leaves all one color and not to give them two colors. You can always give them two colors, go around the outside edge with a darker color or a lighter color, however you choose to do it, and it will add dimension to it, but I was getting a little tired. And then I've laid the flowers out in groups of 3 just to see how it is space-wise, see how I like it. And then I will take a picture of that because I'm going to need to remove all the flowers. So that's really important. Take a picture of it and keep that picture to help you, because we're going to lay down some gloss medium, and then we're going to put the flowers on top, because if we don't do that, they won't stick. And then when we pour the epoxy, what's going to happen is it's just going to go floating all around. So I have this Liquitex medium. You can use a varnish. That'll work too. It doesn't have to be a Liquitex medium. Any gloss medium that you have is going to work. Just going to put a thin layer down. It's going to be sticky. And then you can place your flowers or any embellishment that you have decided to work with into the tray. Okay, so I get my brush wet and I use these brushes because I can throw them away when I'm done. I would not suggest using a really nice brush with any kind of varnish or stuff like this, because you're going to have to be really careful how you wash it. So I just use these little brushes, and I can buy them in multiple packs. I think I showed you the pack a little bit earlier, and that will work. So I'm just going to make sure I cover the tray so it's sticky, and then I can add the flowers to it. And it protects the paint as well. But it's going to get covered with epoxy, so it's going to be protected. It's very simple. You don't want your flowers to float around once you start using the epoxy. So if you see a few little bubbles, you can always torch them out, but it will cause the Liquitex or the varnish that you use to dry a little bit. I took a picture of how I had the flowers laid out just to kind of remind me how I did it. And that will help me to get started in putting the flowers down. And once I get them in place, I push them down, kind of give them a little tap so that to help them stick. So it's coming together real nicely. I'm happy with how it's going. I've only been adding one leaf to each bunch of flowers, and I have a few extra leaves left over, so I'm going to add a few more. Now my varnish is starting to dry a little bit, so I will have to check the flowers and the leaves to make sure that they're still stuck. If there are some that didn't stick very well, I can just take my brush. I've set my varnish brush to the side, and I can just pick up the flower, paint on a little bit of varnish if need be, and stick it back down. So you do need to go through and check once you've laid everything down, because all of it might not have stuck. Now it's time to check to see if any of the flowers didn't stick. So I found one that didn't stick. And so I just add a little more from what's left on the brush. Press it down. Apologize if you hear my cats starting to growl at each other as I do the voiceover here. And I will go through and check the rest of the flowers, and there are a few that didn't stick. So it's real important that you take the time to do that, because if it comes, if it's loose and then you're pouring your epoxy, it could really separate it. And then you got to kind of push it back, and it just causes you a little bit of frustration. So kind of like the frustration I feel right now with my cats deciding to fight while I'm recording. Okay, there was a leaf that didn't really stick. That was the second leaf that I added. So see, I added that, and everything was already drying. And that second leaf did not stick either. So make sure that you do that if you're making these trays. With anything that you use, because sometimes it just doesn't quite stick, and you'll just be a lot happier just knowing everything's in place when you're getting ready to put your epoxy down. I have time-stamped everything, so if you already know how to mix epoxy, you can skip to the next part, because that's the next thing I do. Is I'm going to talk about epoxy and show people how to mix it, how to measure, how much you need. think we're ready for the next step. Okay, I buy these sticks at Home Depot. I think you get 30 of them for like $1.30 or $1.40. And they're nice for stirring epoxy. They're also big and long enough that I can split them in half when I'm mixing paints. Okay, so first thing for your epoxy, measure your tray. It's 9 inches by 15 inches. So I measure it. Then I'm going to multiply 9 inches by 15 inches. And then I'm going to get the square inch volume of the tray, which is 135 inches. Then what I do is I get on my phone, go to Google, and I type in convert square inches to milliliters. So I type that in, and 135 square inches is like 2,200 and, I don't know, 2,212 milliliters. But you have to move the decimal point because you don't need 2,000 milliliters of epoxy. And I don't know why that is, but you convert it. And so 230 milliliters, I believe, is about 8 ounces. Those are 8-ounce cups. So basically, I need about 7.5 ounces of epoxy resin to cover that tray, according to what I find on Google. But because I have those flowers, now they're very thin, but I'm going to need a little bit more because I want to make sure that I cover the flowers because I need that to be flat, right? So that when the tray's in use, it has a flat surface area for whatever you want to put on it. So, I think about it and I'm thinking I need to add about 4 ounces. So if it was 8 ounces, I'm going to make 12 ounces altogether. Now I buy my epoxy resin 1-to-1 ratio. So half and half, right? Comes in 2 jugs. One's the epoxy resin. So just so you know, epoxy and resin, those words are interchangeable. And so 1 jug is epoxy resin, 1 is the hardner. The hardner is always really, it flows, it's thin. The epoxy resin's kind of thick. So I'm going to put hot water in that little container that I have. And then I'm going to measure out 6 ounces of the epoxy resin in 1 cup and 6 ounces of the epoxy resin in another cup. And then I will set them in there. So I think they call it, giving your resin a warm bath or something. But what it does is it heats it up. And when it heats it up, it does help to remove some of the air bubbles from the epoxy resin. But it also makes it much easier to stir. So what I do when I put it in the bath, so to speak, I will put another cup underneath each cup to weight it down. And then that way it's not going to spill. You don't want it to spill over. Now, I'm not sure why I showed you that tile. Maybe because it just needs a thin coat. Whereas if you're doing a tray like that, you've got to have a much thicker coat. So I will also show you mixing the resin and how long it takes, just in case you've never mixed before. Resin, epoxy resin, is one thing that you got to get right. If you don't get it right, your epoxy may never even harden up. It can get sticky and gooey. It can do all kinds of weird things. So there's a cup that I have. I believe that's 18 ounces. So I will, oh, there's my sticks. I'm showing you again. So I will merge those two, 6 ounces and 6 ounces, into one of those big red cups, and then begin to stir after I've warmed it up for 10 or 15 minutes. Here's some glitter that inspired me actually to make the color of the bottom of the tray. My cats got into it and spilled it, but I do still have some that I can use. So I will add that from the bag into the epoxy after I mix it. Now, I've warmed it up. So epoxy resin in 1 cup and hardner in the other. Sometimes it'll be labeled, you know, A and B. So just make sure you do A and B, because previously I said epoxy resin 2 times in the video. I don't want to confuse you. So I think the one that's closest is the hardner, and the other one is the resin. So the resin did heat up a little bit, but there was a bit of a blob when I poured it out. I will use a stick, and I will scrape the cup. Some people will tell you don't scrape the cup, but if you're really good at mixing it, I wish I had that a little lower because you could see the bubbles in there. But if you're really good at mixing your epoxy resin, you can scrape it. Now, if you decide to do a countertop, maybe you shouldn't scrape it because you don't know if it was really mixed well. But when you're doing something like a tray, you can go ahead and scrape the cup. When you mix it though, make sure that you go around the sides, constantly scrape the sides, constantly scrape the bottom. Now I'm going to show you how it mixes, because if you haven't done it before, this can be really, really helpful. I watched a lot of videos on mixing epoxy resin before I ever did it. So the first thing that I'm putting in is the resin. This is the one that is a thicker substance. And most of them have a smell, just so you know. So open your window, make sure you wear gloves. It's a little bit nasty to work with, okay? If it gets on your skin, you're going to feel it for a few days. It makes it feel kind of sticky. So I put the resin in first. Then I'll put the hardner on top, and I'll start to mix it. And I'm just scraping it out. I want to make sure I get all of it. Also, when you measure your epoxy resin first into the cup. Because, like, say, for example, you want to do 6 ounces and it goes just a little bit under or just a little bit over. It's going to be much easier to match that in the other cup with the hardner, because the hardner flows so easily. But you want them to be equal. And you don't want it to be like, close enough. I mean, like, if it's off an ounce or it's off a half of an ounce, it could make it so that it doesn't work properly. So now I've got them together. I'm going to remove my water, and I'm going to start mixing. You're going to see it get really cloudy. You're going to see the resin get on the stick. Possibly, hopefully it's bright enough. But it's going to get cloudy as you start to mix. And there it's on, you can see it on the stick there, the thicker part of it. In a small cup like that, you probably need to mix it for 3 or 4 minutes. At least 2 minutes. And I buy it off Amazon. Extreem Resin, that's what I'm using. I've used other resins that work well too. Art resin works really well, and I've also used Stone Coat. Okay, now it's starting to blend a little more. Scraping the sides. See, I'm constantly scraping the sides, constantly scraping the bottom of it. I cut a little bit of it out so you didn't have to watch me do it for a full 4 or 5 minutes. There, showing you scrape the bottom each way. Make sure you're mixing it. So it gets real cloudy, and then what happens is, as it mixes together, it becomes clear. That epoxy looks like it has a bit of a tint to it, though. But it can be the lighting and everything, but it will start to become clear, and it won't be so hard to mix as it's all blended. And that gives you the indicator that it is ready to pour. Looking real clear. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some glitter into it, because I think the glitter will just make it really pretty. It will give it a really beautiful sparkle. So whether you're serving drinks on it or whatever in the evening, in low light, when the light catches it, you'll see the sparkle. If you're using it in the summertime and you're taking it outside because you like to entertain outside, it's going to look real pretty when the sun hits it. It just will catch your eye and give it that sparkle, and, you know, just give it a little bling bling and give it that feminine touch. If you like that kind of thing, I love that kind of thing. I love pretty things. Okay, it looks like we are ready for the glitter. All right, now it's better to add less than more when it comes to glitter and color. So I'll just pour a little bit in there. I don't even think that's a tablespoon worth. And now it's down at the bottom. It's starting to mix. I've speeded this part up so you don't have to watch it take forever to mix. And my cats are kind of fighting a little bit. I have a kitten, and he wants to play with the cat that's about a year older, and she just isn't having it. So I apologize if you can hear that. So I mixed it up, and then I just pour it in the tray, and the flowers are all in place, which is really great. And it's what we call self-leveling. You can always, you want your tray to be on the flat surface, and you want it to be, even, so that everything's covered. And I want to say adding the 4 ounces was just barely enough. Just barely enough. I think I should have added 5 ounces. But I am able to cover it and cover the flowers. There is some glitter left at the bottom that I scrape out. And there I put some glitter right in the lot of it in the flowers. But you can move it. The thing is while you can work with the epoxy, you can move it around. Just don't be rough with it. Don't be rough with your flowers. You don't want to make them come loose. But there you see I have that glitter in there, and I want to get it out, so I scrape it out. I don't scrape all of it out, but I scrape some of it out. And there's some little puddles of it, and then I move it around. And I'm a lefty, so I'm sorry you can't see me doing that. But there you can see a few spots of it. And I don't want it to be like that. I want it to be scattered. So I'm going to take my stick and I'm going to move it around a little bit. And apologize that that light is just right there in the tray, so you can't really see anything that's happening right there. I need a lot of light to see what I'm doing. My eyes are not as good as they were 10 or 20 years ago. I'm very happy with this. And then, of course, I have to leave it alone for 24 hours, let it dry before I can do the next step, which is going to be to finish painting it. And I'm taking a look there. And then another thing that you need to do after you've poured your epoxy resin is you need to get the air bubbles out. And air bubbles will rise to the top, so you want to give it an initial blast with either a heat gun or with your torch. And then you want to come back, 5, 10, 15 minutes later and check on it and give it another little torch. And then that way you aren't going to come back and see a lot of air bubbles in it. Yeah, I think I turned the flame up there on the torch a little bit, and it's really hard to see on camera, but there are bubbles. I didn't even think there were any air bubbles, but as I put my torch over the epoxy, I could see, yep, there were a bunch of little air bubbles, and I was popping them. The heat removes them, but then more can rise to the top, so then check it again a little bit later. Okay, so I came back in to check it, and I turned off most of my lights, and you can see the sparkle. And I was so happy with it. I just thought, oh, just exactly what I wanted it to do. So I wanted to give you guys a little glimpse of it. It's beautiful. Okay, so I painted the bottom with a little bit of the color that was left over from the tray. I have added a white that has a green sheen to it, a green pearl to it. It's by Amsterdam, I believe. I'm going to show you. I think it's called Green Pearl or White Green Pearl. And I got it at an art store in downtown Portland. Acrylic paint, and I added that to the blue and just made it real pretty. And then I decided, well, why don't I just make a painting on the back of it? And then that way, when it's not in use, if the person doesn't want to store it somewhere or leave it out because they need the room, well, then they can hang it up. So I used the neon pink. I used another light, that's the neon pink. I used another light pink that's from my Arteza set. I don't know exactly which one, but there it is. And I mixed up some white acrylic that is the Artist Loft. I use that for my base a lot. It's just usually always available at Michael's. Yeah, that's it right there. It comes in a big container like that. And I believe it's $9.99. So it's super affordable. It's always good to have, white paint on hand, right? Because you use it as a base for your paintings, or you use it to go in between colors to create some separation. So I got those colors out, and I'm going to mix them up, and I'm going to do a swipe with it, and you'll see how it turns out. Now right there I'm adding a Flortrol, US Flortrol, And I would say you want to do 3 times the amount of Flortrol as the amount of paint that you use. Of course, and there's the kitty. Always wants to see what I'm doing. Okay, there is some plastic right there. And sometimes you'll get a big piece of plastic over one of your canvases. Save it, and then you can cut it down and you can use it for swiping. So save those things. They're really practical to have. Don't bother throwing them away. You can use them. Okay, here goes nothing. I'm going to do a swipe on the back of the tray. I had some paint left over, added Flowtrol. I gotta say though, with the blue, you guys, I added Australian Flowtrol. That'll be my top color, or what you call the activator color. So I will swipe with that color. That will be the color that I will drag down over the pinks and the white. Australian Flowtrol is awesome. You can also add silicone, 2 or 3 drops of silicone into the paint that you're going to drag, and that will also create cells. You can buy a treadmill silicone on Amazon, like $6, maybe it's gone up, I don't know. It'll last you a long time, or you can get yourself a bottle of the Australian Flowtrol. And there I've got my plastic. Got to get the paints out of the way, and I'm going to drag it, and let's see what happens. Big difference when you're dragging on a wood surface as opposed to dragging on a canvas. And usually when you drag on a canvas, you also have a base paint that's down, and I do not have a base paint. I'm just dry dragging it. That's even a term, I don't know. So you catch the top part, make a connection with your plastic, and then move it down. I've caught a little extra paint on there, so I'm going to have to lift it as I go to get it onto the wood. And you can see it didn't cover the whole thing, so we got to add a little more color. Okay, I'm wiping off my plastic. I'm going to reuse it. I'm going to do another swipe. Sometimes it's just easier to turn your canvas around so you don't have to reach so much. And I'm going to lay the colors down a little bit differently. However, the blue, because it has the Australian Flowtrol in it, or if it had the silicone in it, would have to remain my swipe color. And I'm making it a little bit thicker. And I'm not laying the colors on top of each other this time. So I'm going to see if I can make it all the way down to the end of the back of the tray. I think this was the best wipe that I had when I did it. I'm using the other side, but I still wanted to wipe it down. connect the plastic to the blue and drag it on down. Seems to be going pretty well. Looks like I'm getting a little bit of color there, rubbing a little bit of the cells. Checking the sides. I do have tape around the side of my tray. I'm going to keep an eye on that. I don't want to have drips that I have to sand off after it dries. Then I'd have to repaint. Checking the other side for drips. Making sure it's clean. Always put your paint around a surface that's already painted if you're going to do something like this. Just to help to protect it. And I'm going to give it a little torch and see. Maybe it'll bring me some more cells. I'm not super concerned with how it looks because it's not the focal point of the piece. I just thought it would be fun to give it, you know, just give it a little extra something, something. A lot of times when you have a tray outside, you might have a table that's like metal, you know, and it'll have holes in it. So you could see the bottom of the tray possibly, or you might have it on a glass or a plexiglass, and you can see the bottom. So I thought, well, why not? Why not give it a little extra boost there and make it a little more whimsy and fun. And I had the paint left over, so let's go for it. Let's see what happens. I think if I did it again, I would have a base paint because it would I would have gotten a lot more out of it. So again, connect the plastic to the top paint and do your best to drag the top paint over the other paints and bring it down. You can see I'm making sure that I'm covering those paints as I drag it. There we go. Oh, and I guess I'm just dragging it all the way to that point. I didn't want to cover up the cells that I had gotten. So I have a little bit there. And I'm gonna tilt it a little bit because I don't want it to dry with a bump or anything. I want it to be a flat surface. I'll give a little tilt. And I think it'll be fine when it dries. And then I'm gonna cover the bottom now. I don't want to leave it just plain like that. And I'm leaving out the light pink and just putting the hot pink or the neon pink and the white together with my blue, the rest of my blue, looks like I'm running out there. But I still have enough to probably drag it to the end. A little spot I see that's not covered, so I'm just gonna dab it. Just making sure everything's covered on the sides. Don't want any extra paint just flowing down, so I put that napkin there. I'm going to connect it with the plastic once again and drag it. You can use a paper towel too. You want to get a little bit wet, spray it with some, if you have a squirt gun, not a squirt gun, but you know what I mean, a little bottle with a spray. Give it a little spray. Okay, didn't quite do it. Okay, so I'm like, let's do some more. Let's try it again. Let's just turn this piece of plastic into a paintbrush. See if we can get it to stretch. I wouldn't recommend doing this on a canvas. But as it is just the back of, well, there's that light pink now. Bring a little light pink in. But as it is the underside of a tray, not the focal point, I feel like I can mess with it a little bit. A little more blue. I didn't bother to wipe off the plastic. My focus is just mainly to just get that covered. And it looks like mission accomplished. So we'll let that dry. And then I'll have to paint the rest of the tray. And then I will still need to also protect it with the Liquitex or some kind of varnish so that it doesn't come off. Okay, now it's the next day and it's dry. So I'm checking it out and I'll show you the sheen on it, tilt it for you. You can see a pretty sheen on it. And that's what those pearl colors do, is it give you a little glow. Okay, so now I turned over the tray and I'm still going to need to paint another coat on there because it is not covered well enough. So you may have to do more than one coat of paint around the edge. And I've gotten a little brush there and I've gotten it wet because when I was painting, a little bit of pink paint dripped down and I wiped it off the side, but it had already gotten onto the paper towel. And then when I pulled it off, a little bit of paper towel stuck there. So now I'm just gently going back and forth and using my fingernail to remove that, that paper towel and pink paint that was stuck to the tray. I don't want it to be raised up right there. I want it to be smooth. So I'm just going to gently rub that off. And paper towel is going to get into that brush. Some of that pink paint's going to get into the brush, so I'm not going to be able to reuse that brush on anything. So I'm going to make sure either throw it away or separate it somehow so that I only use it for this kind of application. You can see some of the paper towel in the brush right there. It just takes some time and some patience, but you can fix it. I used to think, oh no, I can't fix it, all that work and it's ruined. That's not true. You can fix it. All it takes a little bit of water and just lightly rubbing it with the brush. That will be gone, and then I will paint over it again. Okay, so I can see that I'm going to need to do another coat there on the side, do another coat on this side. So I'm going to coat it again. I'm going to coat the top, and it's nice and smooth. I'm checking to make sure it's smooth. That's nice and smooth. So I'm going to need to put the varnish on the back, and I will do that. Side of the tray. Here is up close of the tray. And here's the tray on the table, just to show you how it looks. And here's another view. It's a little bit darker here. And then just up close with the glitter and the flowers. And a little more up close. And thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed.